When was the last time a plastic watch made it into a museum? Not a Patek Philippe, not a Rolex, not some rare Swiss masterpiece that took 1,000 hours to assemble by hand. A plastic watch that cost $39, that the President of the United States wore to his own inauguration ball, while Rolex and Omega ran actual newspaper ads begging him to take it off. That watch is now sitting in the Smithsonian Institution, and the story of how it got there is one of the most quietly brilliant things any brand has ever pulled off. To understand what Timex did, you need to understand what the watch world looked like in the 1950s. Watches were serious objects, expensive objects, things you saved up for, handed down to your children, treated with enormous care. Swiss brands had spent a century making sure you understood that a watch was not a tool. It was an heirloom, a statement, something that communicated who you were to everyone in the room. And then Timex showed up and did something that made the entire industry deeply uncomfortable. They pointed a television camera at their watch and dared the world to destroy it. Think about what early television advertising looked like. Most brands ran polished, careful commercials, dignified, controlled. Nobody was risking anything live on air. Timex strapped their watch to the propeller of a motorboat and turned it on. They taped it to Mickey Mantle's baseball bat during a batting practice session. They attached it to a dolphin. They dropped it off an 87-foot cliff in Acapulco, Mexico, live on television. No second takes. And every single time, at the end of the stunt, the watch was still running. It takes a licking and keeps on ticking. 5 words. That is all it took to turn a cheap watch into a cultural institution, because Timex understood something the Swiss establishment completely missed. Regular people did not want a watch that required reverence. They wanted a watch that could survive their actual life. The dropped keys, the kitchen sink, the accidental swim, but the torture tests were just the beginning. The real move came 30 years later, from one man with a suitcase and a plane ticket to Hawaii. His name was Mario Sabatini, a product manager at Timex. And in 1984, he flew to Kona, Hawaii, carrying 1,500 watches in his luggage. At the time, there was a race called the Ironman Triathlon, a 2.4-mile swim followed by a 112-mile bike ride, followed by a full marathon, back to back, no breaks. An event so brutal that finishing it at all was considered extraordinary. The kind of race where athletes needed a watch that could survive open water, a bicycle, and 26 miles of road without flinching. Sabatini sold all 1,500 watches in a single weekend. He flew home and told Timex they needed to build something specifically for this race, not inspired by it, not themed around it, actually engineered for the exact demands of swimming, cycling, and running in sequence. In 1986, Timex acquired the rights to the Ironman name and released the watch built around it. Water resistant to 100 meters, lap timer, multiple alarms, a backlight that actually worked underwater, case color inspired by a car parked outside the Timex office, in a building that happened to sit on the future site of Apple's headquarters, priced at $39.95, 400,000 units sold in the first year. Now, here is where the story becomes something else entirely. By 1993, the Timex Ironman was the best-selling watch in the United States. Not the best-selling sports watch, the best-selling watch, period. Outselling every Swiss brand, outselling every luxury competitor. A plastic digital watch made for triathletes had quietly become the most worn watch in the most powerful consumer market on earth. And then Bill Clinton wore one to his inauguration ball, the newly elected president of the United States, standing in the most photographed room in the world, in a suit with a $39 plastic watch on his wrist that he had been wearing since his days jogging around Arkansas. The reaction was immediate. A Washington Post writer called it a plastic digital watch, thick as a brick and handsome as a hernia. Omega ran full-page ads suggesting the president upgrade to something more appropriate. Fashion critics called it an unsightly blemish, a risk gargoyle. Timex called it the greatest advertisement they never paid for, because here is what those critics completely missed. Clinton was not making a mistake. He was making a statement. The most powerful man in the world was telling everyone watching that he did not need a watch to tell the room who he was. He already knew. And the watch he chose was the one that had been strapped to boats and thrown off cliffs and worn through the most grueling endurance race on the planet. Not because it was cheap, because it was honest. That watch now lives in the Smithsonian, the same institution that preserves the Wright brothers plane, the Apollo 11 command module, the original Star-Spangled Banner, a $39 plastic watch, in a museum of American history. Here is the uncomfortable truth about Timex and Ironman. The Swiss watch industry spent a century building the idea that a watch was only valuable if it was expensive, rare, and delicate. Timex spent decades proving the opposite, not with fake heritage, not with empty boutiques and waitlists, by strapping their product to things that would destroy anything less honest and letting everyone watch. The Ironman did not become an icon because Timex had a clever marketing strategy. It became an icon because it was exactly what it said it was. A watch built to survive everything. And when a president chose it over a Rolex, when soldiers chose it over issued equipment, when triathletes chose it over everything else on the market, it was not because it was cheap. It was because it was worth it. Luxury brands spent millions trying to convince you their watches deserved to be on important risks. Timex just kept surviving and let the risks find them. So So here is what this story leaves you with. We are taught from a very young age that price and value mean the same thing. That expensive equals worthy and cheap equals disposable. Timex built a billion-dollar brand by asking one question the entire industry refused to ask. What if the most valuable thing a watch could do was simply never let you down? And what does it say about all of us that it took a president wearing a $39 watch to a ball and getting mocked for it before anyone stopped to consider they might be right?